Restorative Healing Manual, created by Taylor McCormick alongside social enterprise Just Us, a Centre for Restorative Practices. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor McCormick, and I'm currently a placement student at Just Us, a Centre for Restorative Practices. Over the past few months, I've been working alongside an amazing mentor named Rick Kelly, who has given me the freedom and the support to find my own path in regards to my contribution to the field of restorative practices. So first and foremost, before beginning this presentation, I'd like to thank you, Rick, for inviting me into your wealth of knowledge and supporting me throughout this process. For those who don't know, when looking up anything involving restorative practices, a large amount of contemporary research specifically focuses on its use with children and youth. Officially, restorative practices, or restorative justice, originated in the early 1970s as a method of mediation or reconciliation between quote-unquote victims and offenders. But in reality, the foundation of these practices have been utilized within Indigenous First Peoples and Afrocentric cultures since time immemorable. In order to responsibly work with any of these frameworks that'll be discussed throughout this video, it's necessary that you reflect on and honor the cultural teachings which are embedded in this work and the communities which they originate from. This includes critical examination of colonialism and the metaphorical line between allyship and appropriation throughout your engagement with these practices. So to get started, what even is restorative justice? It can be defined as a holistic framework to healing, which seeks to support those who have experienced harm alongside those who may have contributed to or been impacted by the same harm. So basically, consider everything you already know about the Western judicial system, like the courtroom, judge, jury, and overarching colonialism, and throw it all out the window. Instead of being guided and motivated by the state, restoration embraces the idea that the needs and the collective healing of all those involved needs to be the first priority, and that includes the participants who have caused the harm. In order for this to work, a separation needs to occur between the individual and the action. With this separation, participants have the opportunity to openly and actively communicate with one another in an environment which fosters empowerment, understanding, and accountability. While the idea is typically to refrain from the utilization of shame, accountability still remains present as amendments and collaborative resolutions begin to take place. While this experience has been proven to be extremely beneficial for the individuals who has caused the harm, as they're able to take ownership of their actions and be an active member of the process, this is also an immensely liberating time for the individuals or communities who have been impacted by this harm, as they then have the opportunity to attain closure through the explanation of their experiences and by collaboratively formulating a plan to have their needs met in order to begin the healing process. As many of you may already know, whether it be from professional or lived experiences, the presence of substance use or an addiction can be an incredibly traumatic experience, to say the very least. As a side note, throughout the course of this video, I will be refraining from using the term substance abuse, and I will instead be referring to this as substance use. While there remains no question on the immeasurable harm that's associated with the use or addiction of a substance, I feel like it's imperative to recognize the immense power and privilege associated with such language, as one attempts to categorize the behavior of another based on their own individualized notions of acceptability. After professional dissection of Eurocentric paradigms, it remains evident that this terminology originates from a culturally determined medical model interpretation of substance use, which perpetually differentiates individual behavior based on the ability to adhere to societal norms. As I'm sure you can imagine, I have no interest in contributing to this perpetuation of capitalist and colonialist binaries. After all, who are you or I to decide what should be deemed normal or abnormal? There's no question that the use of substances and the process of addiction is taking place all around us, throughout Turtle Island and the rest of the world. While the trauma and loss associated with those identifying with an addiction is not considered newly discovered, much can be said in regards to the profound secondary impacts. When the process of an addiction is taking place, the impacts of such trauma can extend far beyond the individual. Often family members, friends, spouses, or community members experience similarly amplified hardships while watching a loved one go down this metaphorical path. Despite this, the programs and services available to support the loved ones through this experience are minimal. The most commonly utilized programs are Al-Anon and Alateen, which are separate fellowships but based on the same 12 steps and the 12 traditions adapted from Alcoholics Anonymous. Al-Anon family groups aim to support those who have been negatively affected by someone else's drinking, and Alateen primarily supports children and youth below the age of 19. While both programs have fortunately facilitated immaculate healing and liberation, my concerns stem from the lack of variety in terms of options in attaining these benefits. Al-Anon and Alateen claim to be religiously neutral. While this is not inherently inaccurate, the program consistently abides by Eurocentric Christianized values and refers to a specific higher power on numerous occasions throughout the meetings. Due to the dynamics of these programs, they seem to have a great underrepresentation of any cultures differing from the Western lens. While this alone cannot confirm that this form of programming is unequipped to provide these transformative results to those who engage with them, it suggests the concerns that they may be inadequate to support the wide range of individuals who could benefit from this and who may not fit into these Eurocentric binaries. Despite being generally more diverse, the vast majority of services available for those actually engaging with substances continue to prioritize medical intervention and zero-tolerance abstinence-based programming. While these frameworks have supported countless individuals in the past, I have reason to believe that this tunnel-visioned approach to rehabilitation is problematic and insufficient for most. Since it's one of the most well-known responses to substance use, why don't we take a formal intervention as an example? Interventions typically involve the individual who is engaging with substances, their loved ones, and a professional interventionist who facilitates the process. The fundamentals of a formal intervention include confronting the individual on their destructive behavior, proposing a prearranged treatment plan, and including ultimatums in the case that the individual is unwilling or unable to follow the treatment plan that was designed for them. When we put that next to the predisclosed fundamentals of restorative justice, like separating the individual from the act, therefore refraining from placing blame while still being held accountable, collaboratively developing a plan to ensure that all needs within the group are met, and collectively sharing the responsibility of the healing process throughout participants, the fundamental differences of each approach become clear. Interventions thrive on feelings of shame and ostracization in hopes of deterring the individual from the behavior in focus. Alternatively, by aiming to repair relationships through restorative justice, it in turn supports the entire remediation process and dramatically deters the individual from repeating the same harmful behavior. When referring to the healing associated with the recovery from an addiction, as opposed to isolation, people ultimately respond better to holistic liberation and restoration. Likewise, going back to what we already know about the extended impacts of substance use on loved ones and entire communities, it's clear that the healing process cannot just focus on the individual identifying with an addiction, but rather their entire social network. With this information, the current framework of Eurocentric models of rehabilitation genuinely do not make sense to me. Let's just take what we know about affect script psychology and the most primal of social scripts. For the most part, every person contains a physiological need to connect to others and form relationships. We are motivated towards social interaction by one of two things. Either A, when I feel bad, another person can make me feel good, or B, people are interested and enjoy me, and that makes me feel good and want to be interested in and enjoy them. Counteracting this is the presence of shame, which arises when we feel as though our ability to be seen by ourselves or others as competent, ethical, or intelligent becomes blocked by something we've said or done. So considering this, and when considering the trauma associated with the engagement of substances, I have trouble comprehending why one would ever rationalize evoking shame and isolation, essentially contradicting our most basic physiological and psychological needs, as a method of healing. Through my research and critical examination of the contemporary state of substance use programming throughout Turtle Island, the need for restorative practices alongside the family reunification and collective healing process remains evident. Similarly to the benefits observed with the use of these practices alongside healing from other forms of trauma, the same could be felt by all individuals experiencing the implications of substance use in any given community. So you may be wondering, how might this look when actually executed? While I still don't have the perfect answer to that question, in my mind, I like to imagine it like this. So I want you to imagine a group of people forming a circle, and the circle consists of the individual who's identifying with an addiction to a substance, their family members, their friends, possibly their educator or employer, or anyone else in the community that's been somehow affected by this person's addiction. Each person that's been affected is provided the opportunity to share the extent of their implications and the many ways that they continue to be affected by this. There's also the chance for participants to vocalize anything that they feel is important to share or any questions that they would benefit from knowing the answer to, such as why is this happening, or whether one knew how much their trauma had extended onto others. The individual who's identifying with an addiction also has the opportunity to share anything that they feel is important to get off their chest, to take accountability for the harm that's been caused, and to make amendments. Collaboratively, participants are encouraged to then work to develop a plan that equally meets everyone's needs and equitably distributes the responsibility of working towards a shared goal. No matter what, instead of isolation or ostracization, there must be focus directed toward the family reunification and the collective healing process associated with recovery from an addiction. Throughout the development of this manual, I'd also intended to outline the ways in which we could work towards implementing restorative practices on a systemic level. When brainstorming, I had imagined this as some sort of utopian future where reconciliation could take place and Eurocentric notions of acceptability would cease to exist. It wasn't until a few weeks ago, while reading Cindy Baskin's Strong Helpers teachings, that I finally recognized the truth. The quote that really resonated with me the most was as follows: "Social workers cannot challenge colonial systems since they hide behind their colonial altruism." I guess I had been thinking this whole time that in order to evoke systemic change, alternative frameworks and holistic ways of functioning must infiltrate and overpower the current colonial systems in place. But my twisted interpretation of this quote has led me to see it more like this. There's no way of fixing a box that was built on brokenness. You can only break that box down and build a whole new one in its place. So instead of focusing on incorporating restoration within the current systems, services, and programming, we need to instead aim to disrupt, dismantle, and completely revolutionize a whole new system. Because the truth is, Eurocentrism and restorative practices were never meant to work harmoniously, as each merely contradicts the other. But that doesn't mean that change will never happen. To me, I think it just means that now is the time that we need to start taking these steps, or even leaps, towards the deconstruction of colonialism and capitalism, particularly in regards to the community services and substance use sector. So you may be wondering at this point, where does that leave us now, and where do we go from here? And the truth is, I don't know. But what I do know is that we can't possibly continue the same Eurocentric and Christianized practices in regards to substance use healing methods, especially not while we have a framework such as restorative practices, which is more holistic, compatible, and relational at this time. As opposed to perpetuating the cycle of disenfranchisement and oppression within these communities, we must prioritize the development of a restorative ecosystem and begin putting these roots down in whatever ways possible. For more information on this restorative healing framework, the work that's currently being done within the realm of restorative practices, or to connect with someone for support on initiating this process within your agency, please use the link below and visit the website justusrestoring.com. And feel free to reach out to myself or Rick Kelly. Again, I'd like to include a huge thank you to Rick, to the agencies that contributed to my findings, and for everyone listening who made it this far into the video. Please take care, and I wish you good luck on your restorative journey.